Hello and welcome to another SkaredCast video. Today we continue our look at the ITC Championship mission format with a look at how to set up the game and the pre-game directives. Let's begin.
The Dark King.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another SkaredCast video on the ITC. This is part of a series of videos that I will be doing breaking down the ITC tournament format in a lot of detail. This is the first of two videos for this part of the series. The first part of the video will be discussing the pre-game basics, where you talk about terrain with your opponent, where you decide who is attacker, defender, and where you pick your secondary missions. So I will be talking about how to better discuss, whether you want to go first, whether you want to go second, different tips and tricks about that, and then what the secondary missions are. In the second video that will be available to Patreons of the channel, I will be discussing the secondary missions in extreme detail, breaking down every single one, which ones are good for what different types of armies and deployments and missions and things like that. So if you want to check that out, you can always head on over to the Patreon page and support me through there. Okay, so without further ado, let's dive in to the pre-game. Here I am in front of the 8th edition ITC Champions Missions. If you'd like to find out where these are, make sure you check the link down in the description below and go find them so you can follow along with me. The pre-game is one of the most important parts of a tournament game. Why is that? Well, it sort of sets the tone for the entire game. And it's very important to understand how to go through a pre-game so you're not flipping through the book trying to figure out what's what and how to do things or whatnot, like in the middle of a tournament. So it is very well outlined, and thank you very much to Frontline Gaming and all the tournament organizers that have helped sort of develop this tournament format into something that is very user-friendly and very straightforward. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions, make sure you send a message to Frontline Gaming, send them an email so that they can get to it. We're always open to suggestions. I personally am the ITC 40K representative for Ontario, or most of the Ontario and eastern side of Canada. So if you have any ITC questions in terms of that as well, you can always direct them to me. So pre-game, deployment, and setup. So the pre-game is two basic steps. Before any dice are rolled, players adjust and define terrain on the board. Then both players choose warlord traits, psychic powers, spend pre-deployment command points, the free relic, and any additional relics they wish to use. These should be written on a notepad clearly or notated clearly for reference in game. So one of the main aspects of ITC tournament format is that your warlord traits, your psychic powers, and any sort of pre-game, like before the game begins, stratagems and things like that, can be used at this time. It allows a huge degree of flexibility when building your list. The only thing that's sort of set in your army is who your warlord is. Like your warlord has to be selected with your army, as well as any stratagems that are used when building your army. But when it comes to warlord traits, your free relic, psychic powers, additional relics that you can buy pre-game, special like the things that you buy, like extra warlord traits, things like that. That can happen as soon as you know who your opponent is and after you've sort of adjusted the terrain. So you get to the table, you take a look at the terrain and go, hey, it seems like this ruin was nudged off to one side. Somebody must have put their display board and pushed the terrain closer into the middle. Hey, do you mind if we readjust it? Do you want to count this as cover? Do you want, does this block line of sight? Does this little window block line of sight or does not? Are we going to count this or that? Like, that is worth a couple of minutes pre-game to just talk it over with your opponent and make sure that you start the game on the same foot. Once you've picked your warlord traits, psychic powers, and all the pre-deployment stratagems, and you've written them down clearly so that everybody knows where everything is, you go on to step 2. Players reveal the items from step 1 to each other simultaneously. So it's something that you can do secretly to yourself. You don't have to sort of wait for your opponent to declare, what psychic powers they're taking. So you can basically just write them down, jot them down, and then as soon as your opponent is ready, you both declare them simultaneously so that nobody gains an unfair advantage. Then we go on to deployment map and objectives. Now, there are 6 main champions missions. Each of these missions have a different way of setting up objectives as per the mission format. Some are set objectives, some are player-placed objectives. And this is all stuff that happens within this set. So players roll off. So that's the first thing you do after declaring all your psychic powers. The player that rolls higher can choose to be the attacker or the defender. If the defender was the winner of the roll-off, so if you chose to be the defender, if you win and say, you know what, I want to be the defender, you roll for a deployment map, and you can re-roll the result a single time if you choose to. Now, why would you want to be the defender? Now, the defender in ITC goes second. The attacker deploys first and goes first. The defender deploys second and goes second. There is no seize the initiative in the current version of the ITC format, which is when I'm recording these videos. So if you choose to be the defender because it's advantageous for you to go second, whether it's your mission that you're playing, whether it's the army that you're playing, or your opponent, if you choose to go second, you get to essentially have a little bit of control over what deployment zone to get. It lets you re-roll the deployment zone, but you have to take the second choice. So if you don't like Dawn of War and you re-roll it into Dawn of War again or Pointy Dawn of War, you're stuck with it. But you can say, oh, I definitely don't want Hammer and Anvil, and try roll it into something else, for example. If the defender was the loser of the roll, meaning they were chosen to be defenders, so if you were made the defender by losing the roll-off and the person who wins the roll-off says, I want to go first, then you get to roll 2 dice on the deployment charts, right? So there's 6 different deployments, and you get to roll 2 dice, re-rolling any duplicates, and then you get to pick the one that you want. Now, this is very powerful because if you're playing a very aggressive army, you're trying to fish for a deeper deployment zone. If you're fighting an army that doesn't want you to be up and close and personal, wants to be further back to shoot you, you can pick a deployment zone like Dawn of War, and it's very likely that you get a deployment zone that should favor you a little bit, even though you're going to have to withstand the shooting firepower of a single turn of shooting. The defender also chooses the deployment zone, so you get to pick which of the zones you want, and the attacker gets their remaining deployment zone. So the defender will be deploying second and going second, which means you get to see how your opponent has deployed before you deploy anything at all. You also get to choose the side in terms of the deployment, and you get to have a better chance at picking a deployment zone that benefits you. The attacker, though, knows they're going first and can really use that aggressiveness to their advantage. In step 3, players place the objectives following the scenario guidelines as listed in each mission. So all objectives are considered to be on the ground floor. You can't put them on the top of ruins or anything like that, and they cannot be placed inside of an enclosed building. So move terrain if necessary. Of course, knowing what mission you're playing in the pre-adjust terrain, you probably should have thought about that when you were readjusting terrain. Like if there's a big enclosed building right in the middle of the table and you're playing a mission where there's an objective in the middle of the table, you should probably either call the TO or a judge to readjust the terrain for you, or readjust the terrain in an agreeable manner with your opponent. Distances to the objectives are measured from the closest point of the objective marker when considering which models in range to control an objective. So this is true in terms of the smaller objectives. I find a lot of people are starting to use the big mouse pad objectives, which is, and a lot of the times it's just an agreement with your opponent that you are, if you're touching the mat, the big mouse pad mat, then you control that objective instead of measuring 3 inches from the mouse pad. But it's always good to clarify with your opponent if you're using the letter of this rule and measuring to the edge of the mouse pad, or if you're putting a smaller objective down, then measuring to the edge of the objective. In step 4, each player chooses 3 of the secondary missions. Now this is a very important part of the pre-game format. So picking your secondary missions, you have to pick 1 seek and destroy mission, 1 maneuver mission, and if you can double up either on a second seek and destroy mission or another maneuver mission, or pick old school, which is the standard secondary mission that you will know and love from the main rulebook missions. Each secondary mission is worth up to 4 points, and I will be discussing the strategy of picking secondary objectives in a lot more detail in my second video that I'll be releasing for Patreon supporters of the channel. However, in this, I'm just going to quickly go over them. They're old school. It's very simple. First Strike, Warlord, Linebreaker. Seek and destroy missions include Headhunter, killing characters. Born for Greatness, picking a character to do fun stuff. Marked for Death, picking very expensive enemy units to kill. Gangbusters, to kill non-vehicle non-troop battlefield multi-wound models, like big things like Grotesques or Centurions. Big Game Hunter, to kill vehicles and Titans. The Butcher's Bill for combating multiple small unit armies out there. The Butcher's Bill, the Butcher's Bill for combating multiple small units. The Reaper for combating someone who just brings hordes and hordes of wounds, like intercessors or drones or bikes or things like that as well. Then you have the maneuver secondaries, which are recon, so maneuvering all over the table and board control, behind enemy lines, getting deep into your opponent's zone. Ground control is like your late game objective holding mission. So if you're going to play conservative and then jump onto objectives, that's a good one. King of the Hill, taking the center of the board if you have a tough army that can do that. Engineers, which allows you to basically progressively score mission points as the turns go. Sappers, which is a new one that allows you to essentially go in and get mission points by burning objectives that are on the table, and by burning the objectives you get points and deny points to your opponent, which is kind of cool. And the Postman, allowing you to pick a model to essentially be jumping around from place to place, getting you points. All of these combined are 12 points out of a 42-point mission system, and in this part you are picking them. Now, it's important to note that you pick your 3 secondary objectives without knowing what your opponent's secondary objectives are. So I see a lot of people go to a tournament and essentially declare, I'm going to pick Big Game Hunter, and then wait for their opponent to declare which one they're picking, and then they declare the second one. That's not how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to write down the 3 that you want secretly, and then you reveal them to your opponent simultaneously. So, as you can see here, a player may only choose each mission once, then they reveal them to their opponent simultaneously. So, you can have an idea of what your opponent's going to do, but realistically, you shouldn't know what your opponent is taking for secondaries, so you can't pick your secondaries based on what they picked as secondaries. Then on step 5, players begin deploying. The attacker deploys their entire army first, and they take the first turn. The defender deploys their entire army second and takes the second turn, and there is no roll to seize the initiative. A quick little thing here on game length, tabling, and concession scoring. So each game in the ITC Champions missions lasts for 6 turns, and at the end of the game, whoever has the most points wins. If you are tabled, meaning all the units have been destroyed or are subject to the sudden death rule, which means you've killed all of the non-fly battlefield units, essentially. You retain the score you had up to that point, and you count all units destroyed for scoring purposes for each of the remaining turns of the game. So your opponent earns all of their kill more for every turn after. The player that didn't concede or get tabled may play out the remainder of the game to score any additional objectives to increase their final score. In the case of a concession, the conceding player automatically loses the game regardless of competitive scores. So you get your kill mores, and then the opponent can continue to play the game with a tabling to get your hold mores, and things like that. So if a player draws a bye, they do essentially say here, you get a 30-point win as a bye. And now, it is important to note, you don't get maximum points for tabling your opponent or for getting a concession either. And in terms of the primary mission scoring, it's very, very simple. It's at the end of every player turn, you get 1 point if you hold one or more objectives, and you get 1 point if you killed an enemy unit. So 2 points up for grabs in your player turn, and every player can score that. And then at the end of the battle round, you get the player who holds more objectives at the end of the battle round gets 1 point for hold more, and if more of your opponent's units were destroyed rather than your own in the battle round, then there's a kill more. So whoever's opponent had more units destroyed, gets a point. Which means if I kill 3 of your units, or 3 of your units have died in the battle round, and only 2 of my units have died in the battle round, you get kill more. And that is how that goes. So there's a maximum of 4 basic primary mission points to get every single turn, plus the objective, the bonus mission that you can get, and that changes from mission to mission, which we will go over when we break down the missions, plus the secondary missions as well. And there we go. That is the pre-game way of playing ITC Champions missions. So what do you think of the way that you set up the format? Is it much different than what you've normally done when you go to a tournament and you play your games? Is there anything that you learned from listening to me that you didn't know from before, like having to secretly record your secondary objectives before you reveal them to your opponent? Or have you been the kind of person who's just happy-go-lucky telling your opponent everything that you're planning to let them have a better plan against you? Of course, the second part of the video will be an in-depth breakdown of the secondary missions, so make sure you head on over to Patreon if you'd like to take a look at that. A huge shout out to everybody out there who likes, shares, subscribes, and clicks that little notification button, and of course, to all the channel Patreons, you denizens are what make the world go round in the webway. After all, I've been Skari, your grateful host, signing off until next time. Skari out.